Hello, in this video I'm going to go through step-by-step process of drawing this portrait. The material that I'm using is a Prismacolor Kohl Erase pencil in blue. An eraser, you can use anything you want. This one is by Tombow. I also have a knead eraser here. And that's it. I'll be drawing this in my pocket sketchbook by Talent's Art Creation. I printed this out, but most of the time for reference photos, I just look at it on my computer or iPad. You don't necessarily need to print something out, but I feel like this will be a good reference and sit side by side for all of the viewers. Okay, so the first thing that you will need to do is decide how to frame this. I usually do this, just by eye, but in this case, I'm gonna just draw it out on this piece of paper. That's basically about the reference point that I'm going to be drawing in this sketchbook. So everything below will be cut off. And the other thing that before you even put down on paper that you should look at is just study the reference photo that you have, right? So for instance, this model is looking upward, right? Or I mean, she is looking downward, but her face is pointing upward, right? So if you were to draw, if you imagine her head is a circle, the sphere is pointing upwards. So everything, her eyes, the nose, the mouth, it's all kind of in that direction. There's some general rule of thumb, right? When you're painting portraits or drawing portraits, this is usually in the center of the eye, right? Her face is also pointing that way, so you see one side of the ear, but you don't see the other. And because it's pointing in that direction, if you were to draw a line this way, it's slightly curved to that side. So, it's kind of like this, right? Pointing to this direction and this direction. Okay, so let's start. So step one for me is always to sketch out the rough boundaries of the head. So remember, it's curving upwards. All of my sketches are roughly 20 minutes in duration, so I like to time myself, and I don't want to spend too much time on this step, okay? So really rough, just sketching out the boundaries of things. And when you're doing this step, you could, if you're having difficulty sketching out this step, you could divide this up into multiple sections, right? If you do this, then it's a little bit clearer on where things are. And the other thing that you can do is look at the lines in relationship to all the surrounding parts, right? So for example, if you look at this hair as one piece of shape, and you're trying to find what that shape looks like, right? So for example, I'm gonna try to make sure that this shape looks correctly. Right? That is the shape of that hair, that piece of blob of hair. And then if you have figured out what the shape of that piece of hair is, then you can go ahead and making sure other piece of shape that you have identified, large pieces, are correct. Okay. And that is basically step one in a nutshell. You're trying to identify large shapes, right? And making sure that they are being captured in your drawing correctly. Okay, so the next step that I like to do is I definitely try to make sure that I capture the direction of the face and everything like that correctly. And then one of the things that you can do is mark where the nose is, right? And then mark where the mouth is. I like to generally identify like where the darkest parts are, right? So for example, in this case, yeah, that's the boundary, that's the shape. And then I started to highlight like the darkest areas. I don't know if it's because I have a painting background, so that's what I like to do first, right? So, and then once you capture that, like the rest is pretty simple. You just add details around it, right? And here's a nose bridge and whatnot. So this model is pretty interesting because the two eyes that she has is a little bit further apart, right? Like compared to most people. And the eyebrows also has a really interesting shape as well. So one of the things that you can also look at is I kind of drew that based on the guideline, but then I realized after I put it down, it's a little bit too high, right? Like if you look at the proportion of the forehead, right? I don't usually do this, but you know, it's about halfway between this distance and this distance. And then if you look at mine, okay, it's too high. So let's change that. So it's more like here, the guideline was incorrect, right? Now we draw the eyes. Again, I like to focus on what is the darkest area when I try to capture these details. Try not to guess. I find that a lot of people, especially beginners, when they are drawing, instead of looking here and then put down things, they tend to guess. So basically what that means is you spend too much time looking at this rather than this. But they need to go hand in hand. Like what I'm doing is like I look at this, I put down something, but look at this, put down something here. You should never be just spending prolonged time looking at this instead of that, because that is your reference. You know what I mean? So when drawing eyes, you really want to make sure the two eyes look like a pair, right? Another common mistake is you focus on one, you add too much detail here, you miss out on filling in the details on the other one, and then they ended up not looking like a pair, but they look like, you know, they both look like great eyes, but they don't look like they belong on the same face. So to avoid that happening, make sure that you spend some time here, and then rotate. So now that I got a lot of the pieces done, the major pieces done, I try not to spend too much time focus on each section, and I try to refine it as a whole, right? What I mean by that is I then now look at the boundaries I have and then go back and define them further, right? A lot of times the boundaries that I had in the beginning could be not quite accurate, so this is the time where I go back in and fix it a little bit. And then really trying to make sure that I have the right shapes captured in the beginning. And around this time, your drawing should feel like it's coming alive, as in you're gonna start to notice subtle differences between your drawing and the reference photo, and you had to decide for yourself, are you okay with that, right? Because sometimes it is okay for, I mean, at least for me, I'm not looking for exact replica, so a lot of times I feel like it's okay for the drawing not to look perfectly like the model or the reference photo that I used. But sometimes I just don't really like it, so I will tweak it and make sure that I like the creation. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just adjusting the boundaries and the lines to have micro adjustments. Okay, and then sometimes, you know, looking at it from a distance. So that for me is picking it up and then examining it. So I actually think that this is, you know, at an okay spot. Not too upset about this. I mean, obviously we can improve the likeness, but that could be iteratively. Okay, so at this stage, I'm okay to go in and add details and shading. So details wise, the first step for me is always shading. I like to fill in the details first by blocking in colors. Okay, again, maybe that's because background's painting, so I like to block in large shapes that define the value transition. So that for me is, you know, you see on her face, some of the areas here, dark. Here's another block. This section, quite dark. This section, all quite dark, right? And obviously the hair. So let's go in and add these shadings, okay? So one obvious shading is here, right? So, you know, this step, you do whatever technique that you like. I kind of just go by sometimes based on the curvature, right? The contour of the face, right? For example, she's facing this way, so I went in doing this. And then the neck, it's like a cylinder shape, right? So you could definitely go by that, but you don't have to. The hair is also quite dark in this area, so let's darken that. I don't really have a rule of thumb, because now I'm kind of breaking my rule of going by the contour, but adding some more detail for the ear. So almost never I want the ear to be the focus. So if you don't want it to be the focus, smudge it a little bit, right? You don't have to give it too much detail. So you can also see that here, this is a shape. So it's kind of a shape, right? So identify these shapes and then apply the shading needed in these areas. And then also lighten up the areas that does not need shading but was had lines. You want to clean those lines up. So remember, identifying the shades is not just about identifying the darker shade, it's also identifying the lighter shade, right? So this area is the lightest, right? On top of the nose, usually the lightest. There's a highlight on her lip, right? So identify these areas and make sure that they're going to be clean. I always find this part to be the most soothing because you can really get lost in the flow when you're doing this step. Forget the passing of time. And just watch as your drawing come alive, right? You should just end up looking closer and closer. A lot of these are micro adjustments. You're really looking at this drawing here, looking at this drawing here. If you're not doing that, then you risk coming up with something that has nothing to do with the reference photo, which sometimes is okay as well, right? Some of the things at this stage, I think is your style is going to come through in this step, because you're going to be focusing and noticing things that is important for you. And the things that are important for me might not be the things that are important for you. For example, I really want to emphasize the fact that she has these shadows. I think that makes her face look really unique, which is what I'm doing here, right? That might not stand out as much to you, right? And you may not want to emphasize on that. But for me, I like that look. I think that makes her look really interesting. And that's why I'm focusing on capturing that. But you don't have to, right? She has a lot of interesting features that you could focus on. You could focus on her lip, as an example, which I'm drawing now, but I'm not spending nearly as, because I don't really find her lip to be as interesting as her eyebrows and her eyes. So I'm probably just gonna, so for areas that I don't really find all that interesting, I typically just smudge it a little bit, because that's a way to make sure that that's not the focus, okay? That's not the focus area. Usually when we look at a drawing or a piece of painting, if it's not sharp and it looks blurry, you tend to feel like, oh, that just belongs in the background, and you won't actually look at it. Your eyes naturally won't focus on it, right? Our eyes tend to focus in the middle, or where the gaze is. In this one, she is gazing directly at you, so you are naturally going to look at her eyes. And I also want that to be the focus of this drawing, which is why everything else to me is secondary. I'm not spending a lot of time on that as a result. Like her hair, I don't really care about her hair, right? The hair is not all that interesting, and definitely not what I want people to look at. So just a little bit of detail and call it a day. So now we're at a point where we really wanted to make sure that everything is correct. I would call this the last stage. And what I do here is I start to erase all the lines that I don't like, that shouldn't exist, and then really refine the details and capture the focus, like I said earlier. So for me, I already mentioned, I think the focus needs to be around her eyes. So I'm really going to spend more time on here and making sure that's all captured. And I just check the timer, we're at 24 minutes. So yeah, usually my drawings are around 20 minutes each, and this is a good time to kind of call it done. So I'm just gonna spend a little bit more time on refining some of the details. So when I do this step, one of the things I like to do is really making sure the darkest areas are the darkest, because I find that that really helps to accentuate and bring out the light areas. When you darken the deepest areas, it tends to create that nice contrast. So basically everything other than the eyes can be blurred, okay? Because I don't really care too much about them. It's not the focus area, right? So the nose, I'm just gonna make sure the highlight is obvious. I don't care too much about it. Just adding a little bit more detail around the making sure the darkest areas are kept dark. That's about it. Don't care too much about the rest, as long as I've captured her eyes. Just really making sure that our eyes are kept with the highest degree of clarity, so that as a viewer, the first thing you notice will be the eyes, and everything else is just kept to a minimum to avoid distraction. In this step, you can also, make up certain details that you think will make the drawing more interesting, right? So I don't know if you can tell, but like there are a lot of details that's not really in the reference photo that I've started putting down on paper, and that's okay. I think you don't need to draw the reference photo as is. You're really just using it as a reference to build something better, right? Okay, I think we're done. So in the end, I'm gonna lighten up some of the areas. Okay. Okay, so where's my highlighter? Okay, her eyes, to make her eyes really pop, what we can do is add a little bit of a highlight right in the center of her eye. Pop the nose a little bit more. Okay, so this is it. This is the final drawing. I want to mention that this is not the first time I've drawn her. I've used this reference a few times. And the first time that I drew her, which is this one, I really hated it. And you can see that not only does it not look like the model, but also I think the proportion is wrong. The eyes are too far apart, and I made her face look a little bit too poofy. It just, there's a lot of details that I didn't really capture about the model. I just didn't really like it. I also didn't really like this drawing. I don't know why, but this whole spread, I hated. So I'm really glad that I went back and redraw her, and I think this one is much better. And the other thing is, sometimes you gotta be playful with it as well. So right after I did that drawing, I hated it so much, but I don't want myself to feel like there's something wrong with with drawing or with using that as a reference photo. So I did a really playful drawing, which it's not 100% like her, and made up a lot of the details, but captured the essence of the model and the facial expression. And yeah, this is, you know, this sketchbook I use just as experimentation, but sometimes it won't go the way that you want it to be. Your drawing may not turn out the way that you want it to be, and that's okay. And you can go back to the same reference photo, the same process, and improve upon it. Believe in yourself that the next one is going to be better, right? So hope this was helpful. So to summarize, step 1, observe it, figure out which part of the reference photo that you actually want to capture. And you can do little sketches, right, beforehand to warm up as well. I didn't, but I do recommend, you know, for beginners to do smaller sketches before you try on in your sketchbook. And then the other thing is, make sure that you capture the rough guides first, and then go back in and fine-tune it and refine it, add more details as you go along. Definitely make sure that you do the initial steps first, because otherwise you're risking the whole drawing turning out to be not really the way that you want it. Another tip that I really recommend for beginners is really observe the reference photo as you start drawing, right? I never go more than a few seconds without looking here, right? Always look here and then put down your pencil to paper. Always look down here. And it doesn't matter what pencil you use. I used a erasable color pencil. You can use graphite, right? You can use mechanical pencil with lead, right? I prefer to use color rather than graphite because I find that working with pigment feels less messy to me. Graphite feels really messy to me, so I don't really like using that. So yeah, color pencil for me. But you do you. You can use whatever you want, right? Hope this was helpful, and happy drawing.